We are about halfway through our study, When God is Silent. We all experience times, some of them extended times, when God seems silent and when our prayers seem to just echo in the void. I hope you've already seen that God invites us to protest his silence. The biblical authors give us permission, and they give us language to express our hurts and our doubt and frustrations to God. In fact, our honest objections are expressions of trust in a God who is in control and who loves us very much. In the coming weeks, we're going to see how God was working in the silence, behind the scenes in Joseph's life, in order to bring about his purpose for the world. I hope this will give you confidence even when God is silent. He is not powerless. He's not uncaring or absent. And finally, I want you to do this in relationship with other people. When God is silent, we often feel isolated and alone. God's vision is that we would belong to a community of faith, where, as Paul says in 1 Corinthians chapter 12, all the members care for each other. If one part suffers, all the parts suffer with it. And if one part is honored, all the parts are glad. So, before we go any further, why don't you take a moment to celebrate and pray with each other.
Hockey has a real basic system of justice. There are rules, and if you break those rules, there are consequences. Hockey fans understand this deeply. So if an opposing player seems to get away with breaking the rules, the ref is sure to hear about it. We understand, if you do the crime, you do the time. On top of that, hockey fans understand that the punishment should fit the crime. You high stick someone, you spend 2 minutes in the penalty box. But if you cut them with your high stick, you get 4 minutes. And if the ref thinks you deliberately tried to injure the other player, he'll toss you out of the game. This fits pretty well with how we believe life should work in general. We believe that bad things should happen to bad people, and that the worse that you do, the more severe your punishment should be. And on the flip side, we believe that good things happen to good people, and that the better you are, the more you should be rewarded. This has embedded itself into our understanding of God. We know that none of us deserves God's blessing, but depend completely on God's grace, his unearned and undeserved favor. But it's hard for us to escape the idea that good behavior gets rewarded and bad behavior gets punished. And so when something good happens, we subconsciously accept it as a reward for our good behavior. And when something bad happens, we often wonder what we did wrong or what God is trying to teach us. This shows up in the lessons we pass on to our kids. For example, we say, honesty always pays. And the premise is, being honest is good, and doing good results in reward. But when we stop and think about it, it's ridiculous. It's actually dishonest to teach that honesty always pays. It doesn't. Sometimes honesty costs. Take a moment as a group and talk about other ways we reinforce this formula that, upon further reflection, are actually dishonest. Tim Keller says that the Bible turns the idea of traditional religion on its head. And traditional religion says, here are the rules. If you follow them, you'll be blessed. And if you don't, you'll be punished. And the Bible is brutally honest that this is not always the case. The story of Joseph is an example of this. Now, let's review the story quickly. Joseph was the second youngest son in a large family. He was clearly his dad's favorite. His half-brothers hated him and plotted to get rid of him, especially after Joseph told them about his dreams, indicating that he would one day rule over them. And so when they were in an isolated location, they tore off Joseph's robe and they hurled him into a pit. And the plan was to kill him, but Judah, one of Joseph's brothers, convinced them that they could still get rid of him, but at least they could make some money by selling him into slavery. And some people believe that Joseph's brothers were somewhat justified in throwing Joseph into the well, because Joseph was a spoiled sociopath on his way to becoming an evil person. And they argue that God's plan was to discipline Joseph, to knock off some of the rough edges so that he could be used by God more fully. Others see Joseph as an innocent 17-year-old victim of his father's favoritism. They argue that the brothers' actions were a terrible injustice. And whatever you think about Joseph's teenage behavior and his brothers' reactions, everyone agrees that in Genesis 39, Joseph did everything right and he was still punished. Let's pick up the story there. Sometimes I wonder if God is mean. I know he's not, but there are times when he seems to be on the verge of meeting our expectations only to yank the rug out from under us. He seems to do that to Joseph. God tells Joseph that he will rule over his brothers, and then he sells them into slavery. Then he puts him in charge of a very important official's house. It seems like Joseph's dreams are finally being fulfilled. Surely this is the path. And Joseph is faithful. He does everything right. He recognizes that God has a plan for his life and that sleeping with Potiphar's wife is not part of that plan. But he's punished for doing what's right. God yanks the rug out, and instead of ascending to positions of power, instead of being rewarded for doing right, he's tossed into prison. On Sunday, we talked about the temptation to despair. When nothing seems to be going right, when it seems like we either severely misunderstood God's plan or it's just not going to happen, it's easy to give up. I would have been tempted to. I would have been tempted to just pout in jail. I would have been tempted to use all of my abilities and power for my own gain and to hoard whatever benefits I could get for myself. After all, it seems like God can't be trusted with them. But Joseph doesn't give up. Even in jail, Joseph continues to serve God by using his abilities and power to benefit others. And knowing that God has a plan is helpful to a point. But the reality is that God could have chosen a different path to get Joseph to where he needed to be. Of course, we know the end of Joseph's story. We can see what God was doing. But as Rich Mullins says, we live in time. We don't know the end of our own story. We still wonder why God is putting us through this, why he is silent, why he chose this path for us. Rich Mullins addresses these questions in his song, Hard to Get. And I want you to listen to this song together and let the words resonate with you.